And we've got auto captioners going on for us today. So I'll get started since the recording has started. Okay, so welcome again to the Council on Developmental Disabilities Self-Advocate Discussion Series. I'm already tongue-tied here right at the beginning. I am Chris Hendrix, Policy Education Coordinator for the NCCDD. And on behalf of the Council, thank you. Thank you for being here. This discussion series is a place for North Carolina self-advocates to gather and engage with each other, to talk about things that affect our lives as people experiencing life with IDD and other disabilities. We want this time together used to get to know each other and to get to know the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disability, where I and other individuals with IDD are leaders, colleagues, and valued for our input because we are who we are. For those that struggle with IDD, IDD stands for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. People with disabilities should always be valued like that, and this discussion series will demonstrate why and how. So excited to have you here, the very first self-advocate discussion series of 2024. Before we begin, I would be doing a disservice to my colleague, Phillip Woodward, who's also on the call here with us, if we didn't start with one of our lighter items that we experience in the discussion series, the joke of the day. If everyone's ready, here we go. Why don't vegans take risks? Any guesses? Because their lives could be at stake. Get it? Yes, you're welcome. We're here till 5 o'clock. Try the veal. All right, the next joke. Why does Waldo wear stripes? Because he doesn't want to be spotted, of course. That is true. Veal is not vegan. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm so glad we still got some fans of the jokes of the day. Now I will introduce our topic of discussion. Welcome again, everyone, to the first Self-Advocate Discussion Series of 2024. Today, we are going to discuss being prepared for large-scale emergencies or disasters. But be warned, the topic of voting will also be talked about today because it's an important year for voting on a small and large scale. But we're going to spend most of our time talking about emergency preparedness. How does the community handle it? And more importantly, where does the IDD community fit in? Do we have a plan in place? What does it look like? In short, are we prepared as a community when the extreme happens? We'll discuss these questions and more as we tackle the topic of disaster preparedness, emergency response, and related procedures. Did you know that the Department of Public Safety's North Carolina Emergency Management Systems works to enhance the state's resiliency by actively collaborating, communicating, and coordinating to prevent, mitigate, respond, and recover from disasters? For those who need to know, mitigate means make less severe. I had to look that one up. Here's a short list of some of North Carolina's emergency management's responsibilities. They manage state resources, specifically for disaster relief and recovery. They work with other state agencies and the federal government to coordinate relief efforts. They administer state and federal grants. They oversee all hazard and threat risk management. They coordinate, exercise, and train and hold trainings around disaster relief locally and regionally. They manage assets such as hazmat response, which is for chemical disaster, and search and rescue disasters. They develop flood maps for each county in North Carolina and maintain the state survey database. That's how you find out if you're living in a flood zone or not. And they manage the state Homeland Security Program. Now, I just want to divert a little bit and share that the information that I will be talking about moving forward is going to be a general overview of emergency preparedness and emergency management, but we do have some self-advocate expert speakers that we'll introduce you to later today who are going to get a little bit more specific when it comes to our community and individuals with IDD. So now that we've heard a broad overview of emergency management, let's do a general overview of advice for what to do in the event of a natural disaster or emergency. The Department of Public Safety says plan, prepare, and stay informed. Let's dive into what each of those means, and then we'll introduce you to our self-advocate experts for today who will go deeper into the topic. Let's start with planning. Planning means talking with your family members and caregivers in advance about your needs and theirs. So here are some tips to consider. Keep an emergency contact card for anyone who might be able to keep track of family members who is out of state where the disaster isn't happening, so it's easier for y'all to stay in touch. Keep a communications card that briefly describes your condition or disability and the best way to communicate with you and address your concerns. Keep a maintenance number handy so that you have someone to call to help you turn off your water, gas, and electricity. It's very important that you do not attempt to turn your utilities on or off by yourself or have a caregiver do it. Let someone who has this expertise step in. Keep copies of important documents in your emergency financial first aid kit. You'll see that we have a link to that, and I will be putting it in the chat, and I will also be adding it to our list of resources. It's an email that I'm going to send out to everyone after our time together today. Important papers include your birth certificate, your marriage or divorce papers, social security card, passport or green card, insurance policies like home, auto, life, health, etc. You also want to keep extra cash in your emergency box as well. Cash machines may be unavailable. Take photos and videos of your property and belongings for insurance reasons if you're able. Find out if you're in a flood zone. If so, consider flood insurance if affordable and if you're able. Next, let's go to prepare. Preparing means putting together an emergency supply kit to serve you in the event of a disaster. Work with your family members and support to put together food, water, and medical supplies for at least 7 days. Make sure it's all in one place. This makes it easier for you and medical and emergency staff to help in the event of an emergency. Lastly, we need to stay informed. Let's talk about what that means. Technology is your friend even in the midst of a disaster. The best way to stay informed when it comes to state and local emergencies includes the Emergency Alert System, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I'm ashamed to admit I did not know what that was before doing research on this topic. And wireless emergency alerts and alerts from your local government, of course. We will provide links to information, including ways to sign up on their resources page later on in the discussion. But for now, let's bring in our self-advocate experts to share their experience specifically as emergency management relates to persons with disabilities. Our first presenter is JonD'Angelo. He is, y'all, if you haven't met John, he is one of the smartest human beings I have ever met on this planet. He is going to share how persons with disabilities fit into emergency management, as well as some things to think about in an emergency situation. Sorry, John, I'm having some technical difficulties. There we go. JonD'Angelo is a self-advocate with a developmental disability on the CAP choice waiver and the innovations waiting list. He holds an MS in International Security Studies and a BS in Political Science. That's a Master's of Science and a Bachelor's of Science, both from East Carolina. In addition to serving on the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities, he works full-time as a market specialist for an employee benefits broker based in Atlanta. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, man. I don't know where to start other than I know how brilliant you are. And I'm really, really excited for you to inform us on this topic. And I know I sort of touched on this in some of the original factoids and the general overview, but tell us more about what it really means to know your area as a person with IDD.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, when I saw this meeting pop up, I was like, oh, I know a little bit about that. So, yeah, so a little bit of background about myself. In addition to my educational background, which touched on emergency management, I also lived in Eastern North Carolina for about over 15 years and dealt with my fair share of hurricanes, which are not fun. So that's kind of my experience dealing with this. What I'm basically going to talk about today is I'm not going to give you all specific advice. I'm more just going to ask questions for y'all to think about to help you come together with your own plan to get ready for a disaster. Because really, no matter where you live in North Carolina, there is risk. If you're in the eastern part of the state, you got hurricanes. If you're in the west, you got crazy snowstorms and ice. So it's a big and diverse state. First thing to think about is like, what type of emergencies are common in your areas? Are there floods? Are there hurricanes? Even like things like thunderstorms and more common weather events can have a big impact. How have those emergencies played out in your area before? Very rarely is this a new type of event, so it's important that people have done this before, and there's always something you can learn from that. How and will climate change impact your area? I lived on the beach for 15 years. The hurricanes, I can tell you definitively, the hurricanes got worse over the years. Every year, they just got more and more powerful. How is that going to impact your area? Could it impact flooding? Other storms, things like that. What resources are in your area? So like Chris said, keeping informed through technology. If you need to go to a shelter, where are they? Where are shelters that can accommodate your needs? And if you have to evacuate, how can you make that possible? Nobody likes to evacuate. I did it only once, and it's not fun. But sometimes it's safer to get out than to stay. So, do you want to move on?
Yeah, before you do, John, can you talk a little bit more? When you say know what resources are in your area, can you offer some examples?
Sure. So, every county, every city has a plan for how to deal with a emergency. And there's a whole host of resources that are brought in the event something happens, from the state, the county, non-governmental, even the military will get involved. So, just stay connected with those technology resources so that you know what is being offered. Even things like, hey, it's really cold today. Sometimes they offer warming shelters where if you don't have heat or things like that, you can warm up, and that's something that happens regularly. It's not just the hurricanes.
That's one of the more interesting things that I came across in doing this this research, is that I just didn't know what I had access to and what we had access to as a as a state. I didn't even think about the fact that a fire station, your local fire station, is a potentially
Yeah,
place that offers. That's something that I learned from you, so that was super
yeah, yeah,
helpful.
yeah. I mean, yeah, know where your fire stations are, you know. They
Yeah.
might be able to help you in the event of something, you know. Yeah.
And so we talked about evacuation. How about having a plan as someone with IDD and utilizing our network?
Yeah, so nobody knows you better than you. Yeah, every individual situation is different in terms of what your needs are and what your resources. Yeah, what would you, so one thing to think about is what would you need to get through 72 hours after an event? Because emergencies don't end after the hurricane leaves. That's just the beginning. There could be power outages for days. What do you, it could be rough. What can you do without? And what do you absolutely need? So, if you're someone who has a tracheotomy and is on a ventilator, well, power is going to be really important for you. So thinking about what's nice to have and what you have to have, I'm someone who likes to take a shower every day. Well, if there's no power, well, I'm not taking a shower every day then. That's a nice to have. It's not, a necessity. And just, yeah.
You mentioned that one thing to keep in mind is that your support is going through the emergency as well. So can we talk about what we can do to support each other?
Yeah, I think this is a really important part because, whenever a disaster hits, it ain't just you going through it. It's going to be, if you have DSPs, it's going to be them too, most likely. So really, I think it's important to come together and figure out how you can mutually help each other. And I think flexibility is the most important thing with that. For example, if you need a DSP to come with you or to be with you during emergency, even simple things like, hey, is it okay if they bring their dog to stay with you during the emergency? So that way their dog isn't home alone during the hurricane, for example. But also things like, do you have enough supplies to help them as well? Because again, they need to eat, they need to do all the same things too. And just be flexible. That's the most important thing.
And to be clear, John, these are things that there are two things. You said a lot of really important things, but two things that stand out to me, in addition to flexibility, these are all things that really need to be discussed beforehand.
Exactly.
Like way beforehand. And you also said the emergency doesn't end just because the storm goes away, which I think is really, really huge. And so I think, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think about Hurricane Katrina. The storm was not the problem. The problem was after the storm when the levees broke. That's when the real disaster started. And, people thought, okay, well, the hurricane's passed. Well, yes, the hurricane passed, but then the levees broke. So there is an aftermath, and that is a big part of it. Which kind of leads me into kind of the last thing I wanted to just point out. When you have a large scale disaster, freedom of movement is often restricted for various reasons. For example, if you ever dealt with a hurricane, occasionally they will put roadblocks up to prevent people from getting into an area before it's ready to go back to. It's one thing you can do. Well, that can create a scenario where your DSP might not be able to get to you. So one thing you could do to help in that regard is give your DSP some kind of a letter that explains in plain English their job and why it is vitally important that they be able to get to you. It won't always work, but you never know. You might get a police officer or a National Guardsman who understands, okay, this is a really important person. They need to get to their client. And that could help.
John, thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about. You even threw in some tips and tricks of the trade, specifically focused on our community. And my final takeaway there, as we take just a couple more seconds to wrap up, was really that plain language explanations for you and for your support staff is massive. And as much as we would like to assume that the people who take good care of us, like those that manage our emergencies, like firemen, like police officers, will understand your situation, I have personally come across them in emergency situations who have had absolutely no idea, like anything about my condition and my needs. So we can't assume that, and we have to take charge and step into our power in those moments. John, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
And I just want to just one more quick point about that.
Sure.
They will be tired. They will be these first responders. They will be absolutely exhausted in these situations. And that's important to remember too.
Huge point. Huge point. Thank you so much, John.
Chris, this is Melissa. There are a couple of items in the chat that I think are directed to John's presentation, and I want to make sure that he has the opportunity to hear them. There are a lot of stories about being caught in hurricanes and tornadoes and other disaster experiences throughout the chat since he started. But the most recent chat I want to read is that Denise Centron said that she has an autism card that has info and emergency contacts. And she said something like that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Things like that can absolutely help. But also, again, I don't know everyone's situation, but if you have direct care workers who work for you, giving them something like that too, where it just explains, hey, I help take care of someone with autism, and it is super important I get to them to be able to help meet their needs throughout this disaster.
Well said. We empower others by empowering ourselves in this situation. In these situations, I should say. John, so thankful for you and so thankful for your time. Really appreciate it. Our next presenter is dad joke extraordinaire, Mr. Phillip Woodward. He's going to be talking about the North Carolina Council's Emergency Preparedness Initiative based on a report written by June Kale's Moving Beyond Special Needs Function-Based Framework for Emergency Management and Planning. In case you don't know Phillip, there is a lot to know. Phillip Woodward is a systems change manager with the North Carolina Council, where he manages community living initiatives. Prior to working for the NCCDD, Phillip worked for the North Carolina Governor's Advocacy Council for Persons with Developmental Disabilities, the North Carolina Division of Service for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and the North Carolina Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, where he wrote a travel guide for people with disabilities called Access North Carolina and handled all service animal inquiries. Phillip also serves as the vice chair and the public information chair for the Raleigh Mayor's Committee for Persons with Disabilities, and received his Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator certification in July of 2019. So Phillip's not been busy at all. Phillip is hard of hearing, wears 2 hearing aids, reads lips, and knows American Sign Language. He grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and attended the College of William and Mary and the William and Mary Law School. He and his wife, Lila, live in Nightdale with their 3 children, Isa, Carter, and Maya. Welcome, Phillip. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Chris, this is Phillip Woodward. Thank you very much for that introduction. And yes, I may be a dad joke teller extraordinaire, but I will be serious now to talk about the topic of emergency preparedness. I'm a system change manager for community living initiatives. And one of those community living initiatives that the council did in the past was an emergency preparedness initiative. And I put the link in the chat a minute ago where you can click and read more about what we did. We worked with the North Carolina Department of Public Safety's Division of Emergency Management. They were our contractor for that initiative. And actually, if you look at my background behind me, I have logos here which feature the council's logo, the Department of Public Safety's logo, and the ReadyNC.org logo. They're from the back of our Show Me booklet, which is one of the products of our initiative that I will talk more about. The purpose of this initiative was to, quote, implement and maintain a program that is inclusive of persons with IDD and that builds capacity for disaster preparation, emergency response, and related procedures and systems. So that was a lot of big words there, but basically it was to make sure that people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities and the whole community around them will be prepared for emergencies. One of the interesting things about this initiative was that the initial focus was on people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities, but the concept of whole community preparedness helped this initiative broaden its focus to include people with access and functional needs. What are access and functional needs? Access and functional needs could be any type of need that a person will have during an emergency. So there could be people with access and functional needs who don't necessarily identify as having a disability, but this could include people with such as senior citizens who are starting to lose their mobility, or people who speak a language other than English, such as American Sign Language or Spanish or any other language. So when you think in terms of access and functional needs, that could include more than half of the population. This initiative brought in a national expert from California named June Isaacson-Kells, and she is a person with IDD. I'm putting her name in the chat if you want to look her up and read more about her. He was one of our experts that we brought into North Carolina to help us do this initiative. And the products from this initiative, as I said, include the Show Me booklet. This is a booklet that people can take to emergency shelters. And if they have trouble communicating because of, being deaf or not speaking or speaking another language, they can point at different images in the booklet to show the emergency shelter staff what they need. The council does not have any more copies of this booklet, but if I can find an online copy, I will put the link in the chat. The initiative also created American Sign Language videos for the Ready NC website, and I will put a link in the chat to those in just a minute. And the initiative trained a number of individuals to become functional access support team or FAST members who could go into emergency shelters and evaluate how accessible those shelters are. And the initiative developed Community Emergency Response Team or CERT, CERT training. And I believe we have a slide that shows more about that, the functional access support team. While we're waiting for that slide to come up, I'm going to share that North Carolina has had opportunities to put its learning into practice. We had one during the initiative, which was Hurricane Matthew, which hit the state in 2016. And then I said the initiative ended in 2017. But Hurricane Florence, which you might remember, hit the state in 2018 and brought the most rain the state has ever seen in any storm. In addition, there have been numerous ice storms, and somebody pointed out in the chat, Western North Carolina had a big snowstorm earlier this week. And then we have the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And I feel that the whole state of North Carolina was more prepared than we would have been without this initiative. So thankfully, we learned lessons from this initiative that helped us prepare better for and respond better to those natural disasters and the pandemic that happened. And then one of the key things this initiative did was it established a procedure for providing American Sign Language interpreters at all emergency press conferences that the governor of North Carolina hosts. So we want to make sure everybody gets the message, including people who are deaf, whose first language would be American Sign Language rather than spoken or written English. And so that's why if you turn on the TV during a hurricane and you see the governor giving a press conference at the Joint Operations Center in Raleigh, you should see an American Sign Language interpreter on the screen with them. And I am going to turn it back over to Chris. Thank you very much for letting me share about what the council did.
Phillip, thank you so much for sharing on that initiative and its powerful impact on us as a community. I appreciate your time today. And I just want to take a moment to point out, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes for what we're really here for, which is your story and your point of view as self-advocates. But as Melissa said earlier, there's been lots and lots of sharing in the chat and comments in the chat, which is awesome. I want to very, very quickly go over the questions we have today. You can go, you can answer one or all four. I also invite you to, if you're not on camera, to come on camera if you're willing and you have the courage to do so. This is our opportunity to connect with you and create community. And one of the ways we do that is to see your lovely face. You don't have to, you're under no obligation to do so, but I encourage you, we encourage you as a council to do so. The questions are, number one, why is emergency preparedness important? Number two, share an emergency experience. Number three, how are you prepared for an unforeseen emergency? And number four, what is one thing you learned from our speakers in session today? I'm going to apologize for going over that so quickly. I just would much rather hear your voice than mine. So I'm going to shut up now after quickly saying that if you want to communicate in the chat, you can continue to do so, or you can raise your hand using the hand emoji on Zoom, or just come off camera, unmute, and share your experience to the best of your ability. We are here for you, and I will begin to look for hands in the chat now if anyone would like to share their emergency experience. And if you'd like to read, Melissa, my colleague, has put the questions in the chat as well.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I just wanted to express one of the things that have helped me. My son is on the autism spectrum, and so we always opt to stay at home to keep his situation as most routine as possible. And so what I ended up doing was getting a generator, and but a lot of times they just sell you the generator, and I wish that they would have more like workshops so that a lot of people are being afraid to use them because it's kind of intimidating. But through just trial and error, I learned how to be comfortable with mine. But we use it just for the necessities that we need. And because I know from my personal household that shelter isn't going to work for him. I mean, when you have to, but we haven't had to yet, and it just works better for us, our household, if he's able to have the things that are most important to him. And so I've been trying to get workshops together to help with training as far as like generators are concerned for families that have to use that as an option or prefer to use that as an option. And it's worked well for us, but definitely, like I said, it took a lot of trial and error, you know, because being in Wilmington and hurricanes, we've been through a few, so that now you're like a pro. But there were so many things I learned along the way. So when you just use what you absolutely need, what they absolutely need, and you plan ahead with the things like, for instance, downloading the things that he likes so that we're not dependent upon the internet, because generator or not, you're not going to have any power for that internet. And so knowing to pre-plan and go ahead and have the things that he loves to watch on his laptop or tablet or whatever has helped. And also like now a lot of things are USB, and so it uses less power. We have like lamps or fans, and so finding those things that can be powered USB has also helped too. And so just kind of now just searching, even of course our go-to is always Amazon, but just searching for a lot of the things now. Technology has improved, so where you can get so many things where it's not batteries and all those oil lanterns and all these things that have risks with them. And so that's really helped us be able to the fuel, making sure that we use as least amount as possible, and making sure we have a covered area to be able to fill that generator up. And those kind of things, just through trial and error and planning, has really helped us where so far our situations where we've had to kind of, buckle down at home, we've had the best experience we can possibly have for him to make it as normal as possible.
Thank you. That is so well said, and you're absolutely right. More trainings on things like generators are very, very important. Thank you for that share, Grellin. Really appreciate you. Denise, you also have your hand up.
I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, no, I remember back when I lived in Florida and Hurricane Irma hit, and we lived in Miami. Yeah, no, because about what you said about the aftermath being the important big part. Yeah, it's absolutely true. The roads were unusable because the trees were all down. And among other things, but I don't quite remember. I try to forget that. I do remember that like the roads were littered with tree branches, though. They all had to be like manually cleared.
Such a common thing when disaster strikes. You're absolutely right. Laura, did you want to share an experience?
I will say that when you talk about the trees and everything, that when with Florence, we had that issue too.
Okay.
There were so
Can you-
many trees down.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Laura, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, back many years ago, I was living with my grandmother and her house caught fire. That was in 88. And so, I got her out and she was like wanting to go back in and get something. I was like, no, it's okay. And then she's like, I forgot to wash the dishes. I'm like, well, the firemen will wash the dishes when they get there with a big hose. It's okay. Just, yeah. And so, I'd go to the neighbor's house and call 911 and everything. But fortunately, her house didn't get totally destroyed. They were able to rebuild it. We were able to move back in a few months later. But and we hardly ever get hurricanes or tornadoes in Charlotte. But with InReach, they try to prepare you for different things. We get thunderstorms, ice storms, that could result in power outage. So they always will tell you to keep an emergency supply kit, have things like make sure your phone is fully charged, make sure you have blankets, medicine, whatever you might need on hand to do you for a while in case you're able, stuck inside. And different things, batteries and things like that. And they do safety drills every so often here at the Day Support Center. So I try to help get our people out that come here every day and get them out of the building and make sure that they all get out in a safe and timely manner. And so, and they have a InReach safety committee, so they will put out a little bulletin thing every time there's a storm to remind people what they need to do to stay safe. So I think it's good, to have the information and to have it in a language that everybody can understand it, whether it's written or, pictures or whatever
Absolutely.
they need to do to get the point across.
Absolutely. Laura, those information points are so important. I heard you say so many valuable things, including batteries, plain language information, really, really important reminders. My colleague Melissa has a share.
Well, it's really not my share. Donna Platt had written into chat that you can download the Show Me app on your smartphone for free, but it says go to the store on your phone and type Show Me for Emergency Massachusetts. Now, does that mean that resource, Donna, is universal and a lot of the information in it is transferable to the state of North Carolina? And you can come off mute, or you can just type in the chat, continue to type in the chat. We appreciate your sharing the resource either way.
So many awesome resources. It's been pointed out before, but wow, we've got a lot of commentary in the chat today. I think we've had more commentary in today's chat than I've seen on any essay discussion series. So this is really, really exciting. We've got about 1 minute left. John, you want to jump in?
Sure, I just want to highlight something that the awesome Kay McMillan wrote in chat, talking about how one of the big issues for IED is that, if you need a DSP to stay with you during an emergency, they might not always be paid for that, for their time in terms of like overtime or whatnot. So I think that's a really important issue that Kay brought up. And also, she has a really good idea also, I never even thought of this, was having things where, if the roads aren't safe, where DSPs can be escorted to their job, whether it's by police, National Guard, or, people who are trained to drive through those conditions. It's a great idea, so I want to highlight that.
Well said, John. And I just want to address, I know there's so much awesome information in the chat, but don't worry, even though we don't have time to read out everything in the chat, I promise to gather all of the resource information in the chat and send it out to y'all, because this is such a robust, passionate group with so much knowledge. We don't want to leave any of that off the table. Could we take a moment to share the emergency preparedness resources page, just when we have a moment? So here are some links to some resources for y'all if you want to dive deeper into it. We've got the emergency management page is the link at the top there. And then we've got a resource page right underneath that, which is readync.gov. And just underneath that, we have the Moving Beyond Special Needs, a function-based framework for emergency management and planning, which is something that Phillip brought up earlier. There's a direct link to that framework if you want to do a deeper dive into that. But I promise we will be gathering the other resources and putting them in a resource email that's going to be sent out to everyone, because you're all so brilliant. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to comment. Please continue to do so. So next, we're going to jump into our voting detour. And the reason why we're taking a time each essay discussion series to talk about voting is because this is a huge year for voting. We need to take a moment to talk about the important tool that is voting, that we have at our disposal as self-advocates to be heard and to create change. The power of the vote is massive. Over the next several sessions, leading all the way up to November and beyond, the Self-Advocate discussion series are going to be taking the time each week to remind you why voting matters. And we'll go over some key aspects of the voting process, including but not limited to the ins and outs of voting, the voting registration, reviewing candidates, going to polls, voting rights, most importantly, your experiences as a voter with IDD. 2024 represents a huge opportunity for self-advocates, not only nationally, but locally for our state community. Do you realize how powerful your vote really is, y'all? If persons with disabilities voted at the same rate as people without disabilities, there would be 1.75 million more votes. Now that is impact. And this year, every vote counts. Your votes will determine party leadership for years of your life. Local leaders, board leadership positions, county commissioners, the governor, even the president of the United States. That's what I call impact. However, voters with disabilities continue to struggle with various aspects of voting, including understanding our rights as voters and understanding our candidates and understanding the voting process, not to mention the physical and logistical challenges of voting. So this week, we're going to start things off, by showcasing just how powerful and how important it is that y'all get out there and vote. Earlier, you saw a slide on the PowerPoint that went over some of the aspects of voting that we are going to go over the next 12 months, and I'll go over those again if given the opportunity. But for now, we've got a video for you. Let's play that when we get a chance.
This is Pam. If we could pause the video just a moment and get audio with it, that would be great.
Pam, please repeat what you said. I'm on pause. We don't have audio. You don't? You mute your mic here. Okay.
Nope, you don't.
Mute your mic.
Election pundits and analysts have wondered whether identity groups like millennials, women, Latinos might come out to vote. But what about a group of Americans who desperately want to vote, but often can't? I'm talking about Americans living with disabilities.
Voting is a pain in the butt.
That's Victor Pineda, an award-winning scholar and disability rights activist. Victor was able to vote in 2008, but not without great difficulty. Because he uses a wheelchair, Victor had to wait for 30 minutes outside a fraternity while poll workers scrambled to find an accessible voting booth. The solution that poll workers ultimately came up with was to have Victor forego his privacy rights and vote from the sidewalk.
Yes, I voted, but it did not make me feel like I was voting privately, nor like dignity that I was trying to express myself like everybody else. Each one of us wants to feel like we belong, and having to have this sort of cumbersome process, it just makes you feel like you're an afterthought.
But Victor's story is not an isolated incident. According to a 2013 study by Rutgers University, a third of the estimated 35 million American voters with disabilities say that they experienced some trouble voting in the 2012 election. The same study found that almost half of polling places examined had accessible voting systems that weren't easy to navigate for voters with a disability. In the time that I spent with these voters, I found it extremely difficult to even find one person that didn't have an embarrassing story about a voting experience.
But this time I had trouble voting because there was only one wheelchair accessible booth.
They moved it to a gas station. It was really very precarious for somebody on a wheelchair.
And these stories aren't just anecdotal. According to UC Davis researcher Mindy Romero, people with disabilities tend to have lower voter turnout rates, partly because of these barriers to access that other Americans take for granted.
Voters with disabilities, it's a population that is very determined to be seen and be represented, but they do have lower turnout levels.
Issues with voting range from
difficulty in reading the ballot, difficulty in knowing where the polling site was. We talked to a couple of people that had experiences. They were blind. They walked into the polling site and they were told there wasn't a machine.
And what's most shocking is not only the frequency at which these problems occur, but how easily preventable they are. And we aren't talking about a major overhaul of the entire voting system. We're talking about small fixes like training staff to use a machine or ensuring that there are ramps on site. And the Rutgers study shows that if Americans with disabilities voted at the same rate as non-disabled Americans, there could be 3 million extra people voting. That's an amount that has the power to swing an election. And compounding this problem with access is isolation. People with disabilities are more likely to be isolated, and this makes navigating the voting process even harder.
A lot of people who have disabilities don't have relationships, they don't have transportation, no employment. I think voting is very complicated. A lot of people, even professionals, are overwhelmed by voting. So people that the education level is not as high might have problems with voting as well. And we need help with transportation because in LA, we're the road rage capital of the United States.
And although voting by mail seems like a solution to all of these ills, it doesn't solve the biggest problem facing people with disabilities, which is invisibility.
But I've voted in every presidential election and primary since I was 18, and I'm 51 now. I have a disability and I have rights, and I'm part of the community like everybody else, so I like to exercise my right to vote.
For me, it was important that they saw me. It's really important that people with disabilities come out.
And it's not just physical barriers that prevent people with disabilities from exercising their right to vote. For instance, David Rector used to be a producer at NPR, and after suffering a brain injury, lost his ability to vote because he was assigned a guardian. He is fighting for his right to vote, despite being well-informed and desperate to vote in what has become a high-stakes election, to say the least. And of course, the voting system being ill-prepared for people with disabilities is a larger metaphor for the priorities of a political system that fails to prioritize the needs of disabled Americans, despite the fact that they make up 20% of the population. And our media has been a culprit too. When Hillary Clinton made a push to appeal to disabled voters, the Washington Post labeled the effort as unusual. So what's the solution to this problem? We need to see people with disabilities, but actually see them. And in order to do that, we need to adapt our world to make that inevitable. We need to build environments with people with disabilities in mind and adapt public spaces to them, not the other way around.
I'd actually challenge you to say that we're not a minority. We're actually part of every single community that exists. And what probably is holding us back is the stigma that is associated with disability. Most people look at it as a problem to fix or something tragic or a burden, and when really it's just a normal, natural part of life.
Voting is the bedrock of democracy. Americans have fought tooth and nail for the rights of African Americans and women to vote. There's no reason why Americans who are differently abled should be left out of exercising that same fundamental right. During a pivotal election where both candidates have such contrasting positions on people with disabilities, feels like a good time to ensure that they all get a say in who gets the keys to the White House.
In short, where there is a will, there is a way, y'all. And this year is really, really important. So we want to make sure that you are informed to the best of your ability regarding the voting process, voter registration, understanding your candidates, and your journey to the polls. And we're going to constantly bring that up over the course of the next 12 months. Here are some voting resources for you. Are you registered to vote? Check out the North Carolina State Board of Elections to make sure that you are. Where would you like to register to vote? Also, the North Carolina State Board of Elections. What are your rights as a voter in North Carolina with intellectual and developmental disabilities? Check out that link with Disability Rights North Carolina to learn more. Why should you vote? That's the powerful video that you just watched. We'll include that link in the resources. And what's it like going to the polls? That's another video. We learned last year that y'all would like video content. So going to try and incorporate more of that as we do more sessions of the essay discussion series. And as Melissa has shared in the chat, a portion, just a segment of each of our discussion series is, I made up a word there, moving forward this year, are going to have through November, will be dedicated to voting issues. Upcoming, just places for more resources and ongoing opportunities. Check out SARTAC, the Self-Advocate Resources and Technical Assistance Center, and ongoing opportunities on February 21st. Enjoy part 2 of our transportation discussion. Part 1 was so robust and had so much information that we had to have a part 2, and we're going to have a part 2 on housing and a couple other part 2s, it seems. So this year is really, really exciting. I want to thank every single person for being here today. I want to thank all of our behind the scenes helpers that made this thing rock and roll. Really, really want to appreciate our ASL interpreters. Thank you so much to our Spanish interpreters and Spanish recordings. Thank you so much to the captioner and the auto captions. And most importantly, thank you, self-advocates, for being here, being willing to be present, being willing to learn, being willing to grow, and being willing to share and show yourselves. The council doesn't exist without you. We are here for you, and you are family to us. So thank you for being a part of our family at the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities. As a final reminder, we'll be taking all of the juicy resources and knowledge you put in the chat and adding that to our resources email. So be on the lookout for that in the next week. Thank you so much to our speakers, John and Phillip, for being here with us today. You're brilliant. Can't wait to see you coming back. And that is going to be it for this session of the Self-Advocate Discussion Series. It is 2 o'clock. My name is Chris Hendrix on behalf of the North Carolina Council on Developmental Disabilities. Thank you so very much for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
I'm getting ready to save the chat.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah.